In this week's Torah Pearls,
how does this week's Parsha connect to the Moses scroll?
In this Torah portion, it mentions the salt of your God's covenant. Which covenant?
Hey, what's the most anointed chapter in the entire Bible?
Expiatory animal sacrifice is introduced right here. But for what purpose?
Jono, is blood needed for atonement?
Is Israel's poverty an animal's blessing?
Let's jump in, Jono.
Let's do it. G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company once again here on truth2u.org. That's truth2u.org. I'm Jono Vandor, and joining me from the Horeb Institute in Louisiana is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross Nichols. G'day, mate.
Hey, Jono, how are you, my friend? Doing
very well, thank you, my friend. And surprisingly, once again, I am surprised, Ross, because we find ourselves in a Torah portion that I thought was going to be, we're going to be done and dusted with this one. It's going to be quick. It's going to be kind of boring. We're in the book of Leviticus, and as our AI critical scholar pointed out last week, this is a book that usually people prefer to skip, but not us. We are absolutely in it, and it's far more interesting, I'll be honest, than I thought it was going to be. So we are in Season 3 of Torah Pearls, brought to you by Tanakh Tours, Tanakh, TanakhTours.com. Join us this November. Ross and I are going to Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. You can come with us, and there are still some seats on the bus. So
that is unbelievable that we still have seats left. That is unbelievable.
They're filling, but they're still there, so there's still time for you, and we'd love for you to join us. Yes, Vayikra, that is where we are, the beginning of Leviticus. And as I said, our AI critical scholar Ezra is with us. Ezra, give us a critical summary of Vayikra.
All right, buckle up, listeners. Vayikra is where things get lit, literally. Fires on the altar, smoke rising, blood dashed. It's the priestly manual in all its glory. But if you're looking for a story, this parasha is not it. We're diving straight into the ritual world of ancient Israelite religion with a critical lens. From an academic standpoint, Vayikra marks the formal beginning of what scholars call the priestly source, or P. This material is highly structured, deeply theological, and obsessed, lovingly so, with cultic precision. You can feel the shift from the narrative drama of Exodus to the meticulous world of Leviticus. The narrative halts. Instead, we get a systematic guide to offerings, burnt grain, peace, sin, and guilt, each one with its own choreography of sacrifice, which animal, how the blood is handled, where the fat goes, every detail matters. Text critically, this section likely reflects post-exilic priestly interests. We're looking at a period when the priestly class had reasserted itself and needed to reestablish purity, order, and social hierarchy, especially as Israel was piecing its identity back together after the Babylonian exile. Its theology enacted through ritual. The priesthood becomes the intermediary between Israel and Jehovah, and the altar functions as the central stage for atonement, communion, and the performance of holiness. And let's not ignore the documentary hypothesis angle. Vayikra is pure P. It's legalistic, obsessed with boundaries, and sees God as transcendent and manifesting through glory and ritual. Unlike the Yahwist or Elohist narratives, there's no anthropomorphic banter with God here, just divine instruction. Precision is piety. So, what do we do with a parasha that feels more like a liturgical manual than spiritual inspiration? We recognize that for the ancient Israelite, ritual was theology in action. These sacrifices weren't dead religion. They were living symbols of covenantal relationship. What strikes you when you read this parasha? Is it the order, the blood, the silence of the laity? Hit us with your thoughts.
Theology through sacrifice, Ross. I think Ezra nailed it. Theology through sacrifice, and he's quite right. We are in the meticulous is a good word.
It is.
World of the priestly source. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, we are in the world of P. Now, just so people don't get confused, we're talking about the text-critical approach, primarily the documentary hypothesis in this season of Torah Pearls. And one thing that I'll say is, it's not that P begins here in Leviticus, lest you be confused. That's not what Ezra meant. I'm certain of it, because we encounter P in the very opening words of Genesis. But this is where P hits the highest points in its theology. Right. That's what the point is. And I would just say there are only two exceptions. Everything is P according to the documentary hypothesis, with two exceptions. very small places in the text of Leviticus which are attributed to the redactor Jono, and we're not going to get into those for quite a while. We'll cross that bridge literally when we get there. I'm ready,
All right.
Jono. Go ahead.
We are going to unpack that a little bit just on what you were talking about, and in fact, touching more on what you presented last Shabbat. But before we do that, Ross, I want to read a question from Doug. G'day, Doug. Doug Martin.
Hey, Doug.
He asked a question last week, and it plays right into what we're talking about. He said, we all suspect that the P material in Leviticus and elsewhere is a late addition to what J, E, and D authored. And yet, Ross, it is preserved in the Torah. In fact, it is the vast majority of the Torah. Why? If it wasn't God's will or desire for the rituals prescribed by the P source, why do you suppose he saw to their preservation and what he knew would become his statement? Did he have something up his sleeve that isn't plainly obvious to most of us, or did the P source simply slip one past the stewards and his scrolls, perhaps Ezra, so that the Tanakh is mistakenly filled with mischaracterization of Jehovah? Did God want the material there or not? And if he did, why? I thought that was an excellent question, Doug. Thank you so much. And
that is, by the way, that is typical of Doug. Always comes up with something that really puts you on the spot. He's got a remarkable blog. Maybe we'll share a link to that. He writes very well. He's very well versed in not only the documentary hypothesis. He is, I guess it's fair to say he's an amateur archaeologist. He's participated in digs, and he is a well-read person on the Moses scroll as well. So I'll put a link to his blog in the comments.
There you go. And there's a lot of other great comments last week
Yep.
as well. We don't have time to do them all, but I'm just going to pick on Doug's because that's a good one. Well, the first thing that it reminded me of, Ross, was a couple of verses. And these are verses that we often quote. One is Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 25. This is Ezekiel, this is God speaking in the first person. I also gave them statutes that were not good and ordinances by which they could not live. Psalm 81, verse 12 says something similar. And the other verse was Jeremiah 8:8, which we often quote as well. How can you say that we are wise and the law of the Lord is with us? But behold, the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie. What comes to your mind?
I'll tell you what comes to my mind, Jono. You just got us in trouble with the religious police. I'm telling you,
isn't that
time. Oh, my goodness. Every time we bring this up, people say, well, that's not actually what that says. See, technically, the way you have to read that is, and they start monkeying with the text to try to make it make something that fits their theology. And Jono, we're right.
I used to do it.
Well, I used to do it too. Okay, so let me tell you what it makes me think of. You just gave the perfect layout, two different options. Either God gave these sacrifices, like Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 25, but they're not good and you can't live by them. And it was to horrify them. Again, people will take Ezekiel 20:25 and they'll try to say, well, that's not talking about sacrifices. Read it in context. It seems very much like it is. The other is that the word has been hijacked, that somebody went in and changed it. An enemy planted tares in a field of wheat. Let me give you two more verses that go with Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 8. In the time of Jeremiah, in the days of Josiah, the Torah that Moses wrote was supposedly discovered. See 2 Kings 22:23, 2 Chronicles 34:35. Two prophets. I'm not talking about Huldah the prophetess that told Josiah he would go to his grave in peace and ended up getting shot by an arrow by Necho on a battlefield at Megiddo. But I'm talking about two prophets, one named Jeremiah, one named Zephaniah. And these two had something to say. Jeremiah 8:8, you just quoted. But Ezekiel and Zephaniah, I'm going to throw one more in the mix. Ezekiel adds one more. In Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 4, he's alive when the scroll was discovered, and he says something shocking. He says that the priest did violence to the Torah. Right. Now, Zephaniah 3:4. Now, one thing, Jono, and then we're going to get back into this, but I'm telling you, there's another passage that says the exact same phrase, and that's Ezekiel 22:26.
Yes.
The priest did violence to the Torah. That means that the three prophets that are alive at the time at the
Mm.
end of the Commonwealth, before the kingdom of Judah is totally destroyed and taken into captivity, all three of them say that the priest did violence to the Torah, and I believe that report. So
Mm.
I think it's certainly worth considering. I
It's
got
worth
on my
considering
soapbox for a minute, but I tell you, I get all excited about this.
Well, these are verses that we highlight, and particularly in light of the Moses Scroll. And of course, this season of Torah Pearls is not just through the lens of the documentary hypothesis, but through the Moses Scroll as well. And the Moses Scroll has none of these things. And if you want to be, if you want to see lore that is going to horrify you, we're absolutely there. We're about to get into it right now.
That's right.
In the book of Leviticus, in Vayikra, our first Torah portion. And by way of introduction, Ross, I want to begin by reading just a couple of, about a paragraph from Baruch J. Schwartz, who writes the introduction to Leviticus for the Jewish Study Bible.
Okay.
And what he kicks off with, and again, this is reminiscent of what you were just teaching about on Shabbat, he says Leviticus is part of a long narrative extending from Exodus chapter 25 to Numbers chapter 10 that may be called, he says, when the tabernacle stood at Sinai.
Yeah.
I thought that's interesting. If you could call it anything, he says from Exodus chapter 25 to Numbers chapter 10, when the tabernacle stood at Sinai. He goes on to say, although it takes up almost a third of the Torah, it covers a time span of less than 1 year.
Yeah.
Right. And he goes on to say, and I'm just going to read it from the Jewish Study Bible here, according to the story that emerges from the Torah as a whole, the tabernacle narrative is a stage in Israel's sojourn at Sinai, interwoven with the theophany and proclamation of the Decalogue, obviously Exodus chapter 20, the giving of the laws and the covenant ceremony, Exodus chapter 21 to 24, the giving of the two sets of tablets, and the incident of the golden calf.
Yep.
He goes on to say that, which obviously is Exodus chapter 32 to 34. However, he says, according to the critical theory that separates the Torah into sources which were originally distinct and independent, the literary source that contains the tabernacle narrative, called the priestly document, or P, contained, Ross, none of these events. In P's, none. In P's view, Ross, and we're going to be talking about this a bit more as we unpack it, but in P's view, only the events recounted by the tabernacle narrative took place. The centrality of the tabernacle narrative is therefore far more pronounced in P than in the redacted Torah, since in P, only in connection with the arrival of the divine presence to dwell among the Israelites was a code of law given and the social structure established. No other theophany or covenant preceded it, and no sin of collective apostasy followed it, the golden calf and so forth. I thought that was an excellent summary. And again, you elaborated greatly on that in your last Shabbat presentation. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit on any of that now?
No, I think you nailed it. And Schwartz does an excellent job. He is a very, very great writer in the sense that he puts you right into the text and challenges us with some of the most important challenges that we face. Again, what the priestly writer obviously does is stand in contrast, stark contrast, with what we find among some of the other sources within the Torah. That is going to become obvious and evident as we work our way through Leviticus. And again, it's one of the things that's going to help us find our way through this quagmire is by looking at things horizontally, where one text deals with a subject one way and the priestly writer deals with it another. And we're going to look at some of those in the next few weeks. So that's all I have to say about that. I think it's a good, Schwartz, I tell you, the Jewish Study Bible, by the way, we talk about it all the time, but it really is, and the link is in the comments, the description of this video, for those who would like to get that Bible. Very good, very helpful.
It's a textbook for this course. The translation isn't the best, but the study notes are just brilliant. And
I agree.
Worth having a copy on the shelf. Vayikra. Okay, so chapter 1, verse 1. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The Lord called to Moses, Ross. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them." He spoke to them from the tent. He's called him from the tent of meeting. Moses is somewhere out there. God is in the tents, and he's like, hey, Moses!
Yeah.
Moses! What are your thoughts?
I tell you, the priestly writer gets even more precise. One of the things that I always think about whenever, according to P or the priestly writer, whenever God speaks to Moses, it's always in the tent, right? People see the form and so forth. But here it is in chapter 7, verse 89 of Numbers. If I can just read this one, this is from the JPS. When Moses went into the tent of meeting to speak with him, he would hear the voice addressing him from above the cover that was on top of the ark of the pact between the two cherubim. Thus, he spoke to him. So it's really specific, according to the priestly writer, like Moses is walking around and he hears this voice, just like you illustrated. And it's not like he has to go in and kind of look around. He knows exactly where to go. That's where the voice is coming from. It's coming from the ark made by, according to the priestly source, Bezalel and Aholiab, according to Deuteronomy and our Moses scroll. We don't know of that ark. That ark that we know of is made by Moses. So
right, sure. So it goes on to say, God says to Moses, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, Ross, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to the Lord, he shall choose his offering from the herd or from the flock. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in his behalf before the Lord. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, that it may be acceptable on his behalf in expiation for him, Ross. This is the first time that we see this. This is an expiatory gift offering. This is a voluntary gift offering for the alleviation or the remission of sin. We see this first in chapter 29 of Exodus for Aaron and for his sons. If I remember correctly, we see them offering sacrifices that wipe them clean, so to speak. But this is the first time that we see it for the people. And again, this is voluntary. A little later on from chapter 4 and on, we're going to see how that is obligatory. There are sacrifices that are obliged upon the people that they have to perform. But this is sort of like if you want to leave an apple on the desk for the teacher, Ross. You can voluntarily.
And who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Who doesn't want to do? That's right. You've got to grease the wheels, and you've got to make sure you get the good grades. So you've got to voluntarily bring a gift and just leave it there. And this is where we're at. It's very interesting. But expiatory sacrifice, we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to chapter 4. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me ask you. You just used a big theological parochial word, and people have to get ready for our vocabulary test at the end of the Leviticus study. You said expiatory something.
Sacrifice,
Sacrifice, right? So what I'm curious, of course, in my ASV, in like the Leviticus Torah tablet, I have to make atonement for him.
Yes.
So we've got atonement, but here, let me just say this, because I want to bring Ezra in just to help our viewers out. Let's define expiatory, atonement. What is all that, and what is the Hebrew behind that? Because let me tell you, we are going to see a lot of this word in Leviticus and in the priestly material. Let's bring Ezra. Ezra, what is all this? What's behind expiatory, atonement, and all these good theological terms?
Great question. And this gets to the heart of Leviticus and priestly theology. The Hebrew root kar, KPR, is the engine behind words like atonement and expiation in English, but its original meaning is more physical than abstract. It likely meant to cover or to smear. Think of pitch covering Noah's Ark, same root. In the priestly context, though, it evolves into a technical term, to ritually purge or cleanse, especially through blood. So when Leviticus talks about making atonement, it's not about emotional repentance. It's about ritually cleansing impurity or guilt from sacred space so that Jehovah can continue dwelling among the people. The idea is not appeasement, but maintenance of access, keeping the divine presence from breaking out in judgment. In short, kafar in Leviticus isn't about internal guilt. It's about external ritual repair.
We're going to have a little bit more to say about that as well as we continue. KPR,
Sure.
remind me, we're going to touch on that as we go forward. Another thing that I'm going to throw into the mix of what Ezra just said is that the word atonement, Ross, is given to us, coined by William Tyndale in what must be the 1500s, I guess.
Okay.
And William Tyndale, we have a lot to thank William Tyndale for, because up until that point, there were various attempts to make translations in order to make the word of God available to the common people.
Yeah.
Not everybody spoke Latin or Hebrew or Greek, and so there was an enormous effort up until that point, and including, I mean, it cost Tyndale his life,
Absolutely.
to silence people who were attempting to do this because the priestly class, if you like, needed to protect their institution. If the people know, then they might start to think for themselves. They might start to research and evaluate. They might, so on and so forth. And it was no different back in the day, Ross. And I dare say it might be the reason why the Moses Scroll itself was written off as a forgery, or that it was pushed in that direction to be framed. So I'm going to go down a rabbit trail if I talk about that anymore.
Wait,
but
well,
go ahead.
I no, that's perfect. I'm glad you brought that up, and thanks to Tyndale. We want to give a shout out to people like that who put their life on the line and got us closer, so that we can do what we do. So anyway,
Absolutely.
I was going to add that the word atonement, kafar. One of the things that the reason I think that it's important that we really pay attention to some of this vocabulary. First of all, it's mentioned 123 times in 113 verses, 50 times, Jono, in Leviticus. So we're going to see atonement over and over and over. 50, almost half of the occurrences in all the Hebrew Bible occur right here in the book we're in. How about that?
That is interesting. I am going to read this now, all right, just because we're talking about it. This is to do with chapter 24. Chapter 4. We're going to get there soon. Such sacrificial rituals are said to atone, Hebrew kippur, as you just pointed out, traditionally understood as amends or wrongdoing. Atonement, in this view, is a sort of payment made to appropriate an angry deity and be reconciled with him. However, Hebrew kippur actually means wipe clean, and the atoning act consists of the application of the blood of the animal to the sanctuary as a whole and to the objects therein. It is strikingly reminiscent, Ross, to Mesopotamian ritual texts where the root KPR is used to refer to the ritual cleansing of temples. It follows that, quote-unquote, atonement in P is actually a type of expiation by which the divine abode is ritually purged of contamination that is accumulated there. According to this, P is this contamination comes from the Israelites' bodily impurities. We'll be talking about that. You can't wait, can you, when we get to chapters 12
I am
to 15
so excited. Yeah.
of Leviticus.
My favorite part of the Bible.
Favorite part of the Bible. And from certain acts of wrongdoing that they commit, it defiles the sanctuary, Ross. And if allowed to collect there, threatens the community collectively, their entire existence. So atonement, which is really temple purification, is thus of critical importance. And that's really it. That sums it up in a nutshell, I think, that expiatory sacrifice is for the purpose of the tabernacle. If we did not have a tabernacle, if we didn't have a sacred place, a shrine, a temple, there would be no necessity for animal sacrifice.
That, Jono, is the best I've ever heard it described. If we didn't have a tabernacle or a temple, there's no need for any of this. And let me just say one other thing on that. By the way, I mean, I'm serious. That is succinct. You could put that on a T-shirt, because the bottom line is what we no longer understand, and what a lot of people miss and go off the tangent on a tangent theologically, is because we no longer have this idea of what it means to have sacred zones. That when we talk about unclean and clean, or pure and impure, zones of holiness and areas where more holiness is required. None of those things, we don't have anything in the modern world that relate to it, so we miss that. But you nailed it. It's
Mm.
dealing with these ancient temples. That's what it
It, it,
really comes down to.
that's really what it is. As soon as a sacred place is installed or initiated, you have an institution and it has to be maintained. And part of that maintenance is the sacrificial system. It exists; they exist for each other.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have one, you wouldn't have the other. If you don't have the tabernacle, you don't need sacrifice. You don't need a priesthood. And we've said this many times that the Moses Scroll does not necessitate any of this stuff, nor is it in the Moses Scroll. In fact, the Moses Scroll does not necessitate, it does not require the remission of sins. It doesn't have a remedy for sin. What it has is corresponding curses and curses and blessings to each commandment. And you are either you're blessed or you are cursed according to your observation or disobedience to those commandments.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It's that simple. And that is the reason why, like I'm going off on a tangent now, but that is the reason why the blessings, the blessed bees specifically, are missing from Deuteronomy. And that right where they were is sewn in all of this this other material, chapters 12 to 26. If you have a divine instruction that you are blessed by observing the 10 commandments, blessed be the one who does this commandment.
Yeah.
Blessed be the one who does this. If you have that, then it confines everything to the 10 commandments. And you can't do that if you want the institution of the priestly class, the temple, the sacrifice. If you want all of that stuff, it has to be, there's an institution that has to be protected. You got to take that out. You got to take that out. And so when they found it again, they looked at it and they said, you know what? Fine, this is okay. We'll view this as an opportunity. Okay, we'll show the people this, but I just want you to take that bit out and sew all of this stuff in, because we have this temple and we have these priests and we have this sacrificial system and it's working just fine. And if we show them this, then it's going to put all of this out of business, and we just can't have it.
Put all of us out of business. One other thing to add into that: remember, when the scroll is actually found in the days of Jeremiah, and Jeremiah goes to preaching at the temple, some of the things he says make no sense unless they are saying what you're saying. Like Jeremiah says, "Don't say the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these." And he basically says in chapter 7 and chapter 26 that if you keep relying on this whole system, the cult, it's going down. Go look at Shiloh. And we've had other prophets say the same. And guess what, Jono? If they come on the Tanakh tour with us, we can bring them to Shiloh. We can bring them to the Temple Mount. And you know what's absolutely missing in both of those contexts and in the physical geography of the place? The temple, there is none.
Temple and an altar.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's it.
All right.
Oh, by the way, of course, Betsy, we were talking about her the other day.
Oh, yeah.
The red heifers have been ruled out. So they didn't.
Now, I saw you posted that. Is it because they had 5 from Texas, and I saw that they were making calves. Oh, yeah. Did you see they were actually, the people are at Shiloh and they're watching the speaker, and through the window, they're actually, getting busy, I guess. And so anyway, so they have more coming. But we've seen over and over and over here we go, getting excited because we're going to have a red heifer. And I know there were 5. Then it was down to 3. So you're telling me that now all of these have been disqualified because they've got the magnifying glass and they saw.
They got the magnifying glass. Yeah, Yoel pointed that out. He said, "Thank goodness we have magnifying glasses these days to make it even more difficult than it was back then." And he's quite right. And I'm quite thankful for the oral law that adds all of these stringent requirements onto the red heifer, because I don't believe we're ever going to have a red heifer that will initiate the rebuilding of the temple, which is just fine. And this is exactly what you predicted. Look, while we're still talking about this, let me just read what the Moses Scroll does say in regards to, because I've already said that the Moses Scroll doesn't require the remission of sins, right? And I think GA 8 and onwards, I'm just going to highlight a few verses here. It makes it fairly clear. It says, "And you shall know today that it is not because of your righteousness that Elohim Eloheka is giving before you this land to possess, because you have been a stiff-necked people from the day that he brought you out of Egypt until today. You've been rebellious against Elohim Eloheka. At Horeb, on the day that I went up to," this is Moses speaking, "I went up to the mountain to receive the 2 tablets, and upon them was written all the words that Elohim spoke to you in the mountain from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. You made a molten calf for yourselves and angered Elohim, and I fell down before Elohim in the mountain, burning with fire, and the 2 tablets were in my hand. I saw your sin, and I shattered the 2 tablets before your eyes, and I interceded on your account at that time, 40 days, 40 nights at Taberah and at Massah and at Kibrot Hata'afah, and you were rebellious against your Elohim." And, oh man, Moses is so angry. And at Kadesh Barnea, when Elohim said to me, "Go and possess the land," you were rebellious against your Elohim, and you did not go up, and you did not hearken to his voice. And Elohim said to me that he intended to destroy you, but I interceded, standing on your behalf 40 days and 40 nights on your behalf. And Elohim hearkened to me also at that time and did not destroy you in a moment. It is not because of your righteousness that your Elohim is giving you power to do mightily. Rather, Elohim attached with your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them from all the peoples. That's it.
Well, let me ask this, and maybe we don't jump into this right now, but as you were reading it, and I've read this plenty of times too, but one thing stood out that I found striking, that Moses intercedes because of their sin. It says because of your sin. And the image, and I'm paraphrasing, God was angry. He was going to destroy them in a moment, at least in Moses' idea, in his mind. And God hearkened to Moses. So and relented. So that is a whole nother subject. But your point is valid. It still stands. But just as you read it, I thought,
no animal sacrifice, nothing.
None of that. None of that.
So there we go. All right, now let's jump back because we jumped a little bit forward. Scrolling. We could read chapter 1 and all the grisly, gruesome details because there's a whole lot of flinging of the blood and the splashing of the blood and collecting it in the bowls and flicking it and throwing it and the blood everywhere.
Let's get a commitment from the viewers that they're going to read this on their own, maybe at family time or something.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, before you go to bed. Yeah. And when you do, honestly take time to visualize it. And I want you to imagine this. And I know it's a little bit different, but just to sort of help you along. Yeah. You go to your local butcher, okay, and you ask for a cut of meat. And then while the butcher is preparing this for you, he does all of this stuff. I just want you to imagine, like, he comes to you and he throws a bunch of the blood on you, or he flicks 7 times, or he goes and wipes it on one of the instruments on the horn of all of this stuff. There is just so much blood. Just think about it in reality, right? Just think about it in reality, because I'm sure you would take your business elsewhere. There's also details, Ross, like chapter 1, verse 15. Apparently, God instructs Aaron to make sure you pinch off the head of a pigeon. I mean, this is really Ozzy Osbourne material right here, is it not? Yeah,
ring off its head and burn it on the altar. Yeah. In fact, I've read, I need to go back. No, I don't need to go back, but it seems like in my distant past, I remember about the priest growing one of the fingernails, maybe the thumbnail really, really long.
Thumbnail,
maybe
I think.
filing it so that you can juke that, kind of slit the... I don't know if that, and maybe some of our viewers can say, no, Ross, you're misremembering that. But maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But look and see, is that the way that they would pinch off the, I don't know.
Pinch off the head of a pigeon. The whole verse is really gruesome. And then we get to, now, is there anything else you want to highlight there? Because I'm now in chapter 2, verse 8.
Oh, yeah. One thing, Jono, just to touch it, and we can hit it anywhere in Leviticus because we're going to see it 17 times. But in chapter 1, verse 9, an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto Jehovah, and that sweet savor, 42 times in the Pentateuch. Get this. Now, this shocked me, Jono.
42?
Listen, 42 times, but get this. Exodus chapter 29, is the only chapter in Exodus that mentions it. Doesn't mention it at all in Genesis. I know people might think of another verse, but not this verse. In Hebrew, it's reach nichoach. A reach it has to do with a smell, and nichoach, this sweet savor, reich nichoach, Exodus 29 3 times, Leviticus 17 times, Numbers 18 times, and then you don't see it again, Jono, until you get to, guess what book? Ezekiel. And it appears 4 times. Now, my question is, why is there nothing of God smelling the sweet savor, using that language until you get to Ezekiel? I have an idea I'm not going to say right now, but Ezekiel, the son of Buzi, is a priest. It's priestly. Maybe, I'm just throwing this out there. Could it be that if you take Ezekiel, maybe it's from the time of Ezekiel where some of this hits the text? Just a question.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, let me read this. Again, from the Jewish Study Bible. So it says, of pleasing odor to the Lord, P's unique anthropomorphisms attributes to God the sensual carnal pleasure derived from inhaling the fragrant odor of roasting meat, while at the same time denying that he actually consumes it as food. Similarly, P portrays God's presence as abiding with the tabernacle, but offerings presented to him are turned into smoke and ascend heavenward. The Lord's contrasting human and supernatural traits, as well as his opposite attributes of immanence and transcendence, exist in P side by side. It seems like the priestly source is not too concerned about reconciling these frictions. They're quite happy for them to exist, but it does heavily anthropomorphize God, giving him nostrils and lungs by which he barbecue. Oh, yeah. And we all like that.
It's interesting. It really is interesting. And let me tell you, though, for years I read these texts, and I saw the tension just like everyone sees it, but I just sort of said, well, okay, you've got this view and you have another view, and you just have to figure out how to work them together. And I became quite skilled at doing that very thing, as the sages have done, as preachers have done, as believers have done. But we do, when we take a deep breath, not to smell the sweet savor, but when we breathe deeply and we take a break and we read it carefully, we do see these different tensions in the text. And this represents one of those priestly tensions. So, yeah, it's very interesting, again, that it just only appears in the Pentateuch a few times and then not again until Ezekiel. Wow. Something's going on there.
That is interesting. So now, verse 13, if I may, and I have a question. I want you to help me think something through here.
What chapter? Chapter 1, verse 13?
Chapter 2, verse 13.
2, okay.
You shall season your every offering of meal, right? This is a grain offering, with salt. You shall not omit from your meal offering or grain offering the salt of your covenant with God. Your salt of your covenant with God. With all your offerings, you must offer salt. So my question, Ross, is what covenant with God? What covenant? What covenant is the peace source referring to? And I thought, well, that's interesting. Let's do a little bit of a search. So the first time it's not the first time, but when it's talking about the covenant of God, we go back to Exodus chapter 19, verse 5. It says, now then, if you will obey me fully and keep my covenant, you shall indeed be my treasured possession among all the peoples, indeed all the earth of mine. And it goes on to say you will be a kingdom of priests and so on and so forth. We talked about that when we were there, and I highlighted that this is one of E's superiority verses, right? We talked about that back then. And clearly it's referring to what's about to happen, and that's the 10 words in chapter 20. We then have chapter 24, and this is still E, verses 3 to 8. Let me read that. Here we go. All right. So Moses went and repeated all the rules. This is post chapter 20, obviously, post having been given the 10 words. Repeated all the rules, all the commandments of the Lord, and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice, saying, all the things that the Lord has commanded us we will do. Moses then wrote them down, wrote all the commandments of the Lord. Early in the morning, he set up a pillar, Ross. He set up an altar, rather, at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He designated some men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificial bulls as offerings as well of well-being to the Lord. Moses took one part of the blood and he put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he threw against the altar, and then he took the record of the covenant. There it is, the record of the covenant. And again, we have to assume that he's referring to the 10 words. And he read it aloud again to all the people. And again, Ross, they said, all the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do. And then as a result, Moses throws the blood on the people. And he says, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord now makes with you concerning all these commands. Okay, so that's the covenant there. And that is Esau's as well. Okay, that's fine. But then we go forward to the J source, I think this is, and this is chapter 34. We discussed this recently. Let me go there. Okay. Chapter 34, let's start in verse 10. Verse 10 says, he said, and God is speaking to Moses here, I hereby make a covenant before all your people. I will work such wonders as has not been wrought on the earth or in any nation, and all the people who are with you shall see how awesome are the Lord's deeds, which I will perform for you. And then what we have following there is Jay's version of the 10 Commandments, which are very different to what we read in Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. And indeed, Ross, very different to what we read in the Moses scroll. Nevertheless, we have the 10 Commandments, Jay's 10 Commandments. And then it says in verse 27, and the Lord said to Moses, write down these commandments, for in accordance with these commandments, I will make a covenant with you and with Israel. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights, and he ate no bread and he drank no water. And he wrote down the tablets, on the tablets, the terms of the covenant, the 10 commandments. That's the covenant there, Ross. But then we get the covenant here. And as we pointed out at the beginning of the show, he doesn't really reference this material in the same way. All of P's material is centered on the tabernacle. So my question is, what is the covenant? And having given it some thought and gone back and looked at the earlier P material, that brings me to Exodus chapter 29, with which we have a lot in common with our Torah portion, and you've already pointed some of that out. But at the end of chapter 29, it says in verse 42, say, after it says, offer a pleasing, offering on the fire for a pleasing odor to the Lord, a regular burnt offering throughout your generations at the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord. For there I will meet with you, and I will speak with you, and there I will meet with the Israelites, and it shall be sanctified by my presence. I will sanctify the tent of meeting and the altar. I will consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests. I will abide among the Israelites, and I will be their God. And they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might abide among them, I, the Lord their God. And I wonder, is this the covenant? Is this the covenant that it's referring to? Or perhaps it is this in conjunction with the end of chapter 31, which is also priestly material. The Lord says, nevertheless, you must keep my Sabbaths. It's a sign between me and you throughout the ages, that you may know that I, the Lord, have consecrated you. Shall keep my Sabbaths, for it is holy to you. He who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off. 6 days may work be done. On the seventh day is a complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the seventh day shall be put to death. The Israelite people shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout the ages, as a covenant for all time. It shall be a sign for all time between me and the people of Israel. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he ceased from all and was refreshed. When he finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the pact, stone tablets inscribed with the finger of God. I think that maybe both of those, or one or the other, is the covenant that this is referring to. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the things that hit me, one of the things, and it got me sidetracked for a moment, when you looked at Exodus 24, there's quite a bit to unpack in all that you just said. But one thing that really hit me is that I think the translation you read must have been the JPS, but you said the record of the covenant.
Yes.
And in Exodus 24:7, and that's clearly E, but the writer of E wants us to think, and by the way, in Hebrew, it's Sefer Habrit, the scroll, the covenant scroll, or the book of the covenant. The only other time that is used, it's only used 4 times in all the Hebrew Bible. The other 3 times, 2 Kings 23:2, 2 Kings 23:21, and 2 Chronicles 34:30 all refer to the finding of the original. So the question is this a later writer coming up with its understanding of the discovery of that scroll in chapter 24 of Exodus? That was the main thing that I thought about. And you know what I'm saying? I mean, it just it was strange that it's presented in Exodus 24 as being, the covenant, the scroll of the covenant scroll. But it's not called that in any other text until you get to the discovery of the scroll in the days of Josiah. Anyway, just the way my mind was working while you were going through that material. Yeah, strange stuff. I don't know.
Very curious.
The salt of the covenant. By the way, that I've always thought about. I use too much salt in my diet. I've thought, according to the
you gotta
medical,
season your steak with some salt and pepper, maybe a little bit of butter.
Whether you're eating, vegetables or whatever, I like salt, and it looks like that, according to the Bible, maybe salt's not so bad, and some studies are saying it's not. We don't give medical advice here.
I've been reading those studies too, though. I'm just saying, there is a little bit of a ganging up on salt, I think, in the past that may not be warranted. Anyway, people can do their own research. Chapter 3. So, if his offering is a sacrifice of well-being, so sacrifice of well-being. Again, this is here's a question, actually, Ross. And maybe this is a question that we can ask Ezra, because we've already discussed chapter 4. What were the sacrifices from which Aaron and his sons could eat?
Okay. I almost sounded like Ezra when I said, Let's ask Ezra.
According to the priestly texts in the Pentateuch, not all sacrifices went up in smoke. Some were divinely sanctioned barbecue for the priests. The grain offering, minha, portions of the sin offering, hatat, and parts of the guilt offering, asham, were to be eaten by the priests, but only after the ritual portions were burned. These were considered most holy, so they had to be eaten in a sacred space, within the courtyard of the tent of meeting. The peace offering, zeva shelamim, was a little different. It was shared. Some parts went to Jehovah on the altar, some to the offerer and their family, and the breast and thigh went to the priests. Burnt offerings, totally consumed. No leftovers for anyone, not even the priests. The logic behind it ties into purity and proximity. What the priests ate had been made holy by contact with the altar, so they had to be ritually pure, and it had to be consumed in the right place. It wasn't just food, it was participation in the sacrificial economy.
Let me just highlight one point. I don't want to derail your thoughts on this, but
you're right.
In this answer that Ezra just gave us, we see Kodesh Kadashim, which in some text is translated Holy of Holies, but in most of the translations that we see, particularly when it deals with the sacrifices or other items, it's translated as most holy, which is really what that means.
Emphasis.
Anytime, it's for emphasis in Hebrew, but the phrase Kodesh Kodashim is 24 times in the Hebrew Bible, and most of those don't deal with the inner sanctum sanctorum, as the Latin would refer to, that inner chamber. Some do, but because that would be a most holy place. But anyway, it's interesting because sometimes it deals with sacrifices and so forth. So,
So in chapter 4, as we've already mentioned, this is the expiatory sacrifices that are going to wipe your sins clean and make it so that you are not going to contaminate the temple. It's going to decontaminate the tabernacle, rather. But an interesting thing that I spotted here, Ross, good heavens. Let me read verse 3 of chapter 4. If it is the anointed priest, Ross, the anointed priest, who has incurred guilt so that blame falls on the people, he shall offer a sin offering, which is of which he is guilty, a bull of the herd without blemish, as a sin offering to the Lord, so that blame falls upon the people. So really, so you can't have the. So if the anointed priest messes up, the people are going to. They're going to get it, and so I looked into this, and sure enough, that's what it means. And we have another example of this too, and we will be in these chapters, but we're just going to skip ahead to chapter 10, verse 6. And it says, and this is just after God kills, what is it, not Itzmar, Nadab and Abihu. Sons of Aaron, just decides, well, you've done the wrong thing, so I'm just going to cook you. And he...
and we're going to get into what did they do, because whatever they did, you don't want to do, because it was quick.
I'm telling you. He just lightnings them. But then in verse 6, and Moses said to Aaron and to his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, do not bare your heads, and do not rend your clothes, lest you die and anger strike the whole community. So there are clearly things that these guys can do that just has repercussions on the innocent people out there. Fascinating. This is verse 3. All right. The anointed priest, Ross. Here we go. Expiatory sacrifice. We've done that. The sins of the community or the sins of an elder. It deals with all that sort of stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, you said the anointed priest, and then you started running. Do you want to stop just for a moment on that?
Go ahead.
All right. So this is kind of cool, because you and I have had discussions on the Messiah from the Hebrew Bible, particularly from the Pentateuch, and people have different ideas, and I know that there are all sorts of ideas. But what we point out that, in fact, in this particular Torah portion, we kind of skipped over it, but the word anointed appeared early on in the reading, and we didn't stop at the time. In fact, here I'll go back and pick it up, but it's in chapter 2, verse 4. First time it appears of 18 occurrences in Leviticus. And when you offerest an oblation of a meal offering baked in the oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mingled with oil, or unleavened wafers anointed with oil. That word there is the root word mashak, which means to rub or smear with oil. Therefore, this is an anointed wafer, a Messiah cracker, if you will. But what you point this out, and what people inevitably say is, I know all that, but I'm talking about HaMashiach, the Messiah, Jono Vandor.
The Messiah.
Not some cracker, Ross. We know that, or a rock, or a stone, I want to know about the Messiah. And then they go to texts that don't even use the word anointed one. Now, the interesting thing about this, and I can do this quickly, is that this, Jono, is the most anointed chapter in all the Bible.
This is truly, okay.
Leviticus 4 is the most anointed chapter. If you were saying what's the most anointed, here it is. And it's because the only time HaMashiach appears in all the Bible, is in Leviticus 4, and it's 3 times. The verse you just read in chapter 4, verse 3, verse 5, and verse 16, and literally what it says is, HaKohen, the priest, HaMashiach, the anointed. So it's literally the priest, the anointed one. And then we would say in English, because of the way Hebrew is, we would say the anointed priest, or the Messiah priest, or the priestly Messiah.
Yeah.
But in the Pentateuch, it's the only Messiah that the Pentateuch knows of. It doesn't know of a king. You go, Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 20, we'll get there, has no mention of anointed. So the only Messiah that the Pentateuch knows is the priest, and the only time the anointed priest is mentioned is right here in Leviticus 4. There it is.
There it is. Chapter 5, verse 11, Ross. And if his means do not suffice for 2 turtle doves to have their heads pinched off and so on and so forth, he shall bring as an offering for that which he is guilty 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour for a sin offering. He shall not add oil to it or lay frankincense on it, for it is a sin offering. He shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall scoop out a handful as a token portion of it and turn it into smoke on the altar with the Lord's offering by fire. It is a sin offering, Ross. Thus, the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for whichever these sins he is guilty, and he shall be forgiven. He'll be forgiven, Ross, and it shall be it'll belong to the priest like a meal offering. Couple of things that go through my mind. First of all, as we pointed out earlier on, the sacrificial system exists for the temple. If there was no temple, there'd be no sacrificial system, and of course, it's absolutely missing in the Moses Scroll. Nor would you be able to put all of this stuff in there. Secondly, Christianity relies upon these chapters for its theology to exist, right?
Here we go.
I don't know that we have to go into detail in regards to that, but it is the case. Christianity,
without the shedding of
and Hebrews makes that clear. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins, right? The book of Hebrews makes that clear. But obviously, this is an exception, and there's a number of exceptions in the Torah where blood is not shed. But the interesting thing, getting off, I don't want to jump into the whole.
That's pretty interesting. If you say that there's something else interesting, that's pretty interesting in and of itself. Just to highlight what you just said, according to the Pentateuch, even the priestly writer, if you don't bring blood in this one case, you can have your sins atoned or expiated,
but only if you're poor, Ross. Now, this is the interesting thing. If everybody was poor, then everyone would be vegans, perhaps, and no animals would be sacrificed. Animal sacrifice is a requirement resulting from Israel's prosperity. If you have done reasonably well, you've got livestock, they're producing, and so on and so forth. Well, if you sin according to these rules and regulations that are meticulously given in the priestly view, well, you've got to bring some of your wealth, live animals, and sacrifice it, but not if you're poor. If you're poor, you don't have to do that. So this I thought was interesting, because what that means is that Israel's poverty is an animal's blessing, whereas Israel's blessing is prosperity. And if you're prosperous, you've got to bring an animal to sacrifice.
The animals are hoping that everybody's broke, is what you're saying.
Well, the animals are hoping, here it is, if we really play this out, the animals are hoping that Israel does not observe the 10 Commandments, and therefore will incur a curse, and in that curse they will become destitute, and in that destitute they will no longer have to offer animals for sacrifice.
That's what the animals are hoping for.
That's what they're hoping for.
Probably are. Interesting. Interesting. All right.
Well, that's the conclusion. All right. So listen, we now find ourselves in a Hebrew Bible anyway, chapter 5, verses 20 to 26, which is in a Christian Bible, I think chapter 6, is it not, Ross?
Well, let me throw in a pitch for the Torah tablet, which, by the way, Seth tells me that if you live in Australia, that you can now order it from Australia to be printed in Australia and sent to you in Australia. It's going to save on the cost and everything. Same thing for the UK. But what I was going to say is, in the Torah tablet, I have the verse divisions of both. So if they're following along, they go with the English or the Hebrew. It's all in the text, so they know where they're at. All right, sorry.
That's fine. So in the Hebrew 5, verses 20 to 26, what is that in the English?
5 verse 20 through 26 is English, chapter 6, verse 1 and following. So
excellent. All right, grand. So there's a bunch of stuff here, and we were talking about this earlier, but there's a bunch of connections to the Moses Scroll. I was going to highlight one in verse 24, but you actually highlighted a couple of connections prior to that. So how about you start?
I'll do it quickly. Because it is interesting that we both noticed something from the Moses scroll and picked up totally different things. What I saw immediately was in chapter 6, verse 2 in the English, 5:21 in the Hebrew. If anyone sin and commit a trespass against Jehovah, Jono, and deal falsely with his neighbor in a matter of deposit or of bargain or of robbery or have oppressed his neighbor, etc. This phrase, this word behind the English phrase deal falsely is the Hebrew kaf het shin. It occurs 29 times in the Tanakh, and one of those is Hosea chapter 4 and verse 2. So all I want to do is quickly, this is part of what Dershowitz found, and let me just flip to it. And by the way, his book is available for free. If someone wants to get it, they can go to his, that's right, they can go to his academia page. Okay, so the first one I'll go to is on page 84 of Dershowitz's book. And here's what it says. The Levitical injunction, you shall not deceive and you shall not lie to one another, which is from Leviticus 19:11, is a perfect match for these 8th blessed man. Blessed is the man who does not deceive or lie to his fellow. So he's quoting chapter in the Moses scroll, G4, 6 through 7. And then the other thing that I want to point out, in other words, he's saying that the use of this Hebrew that I just quoted there, that's used to translate deal falsely in Leviticus chapter 6, is used in the Moses scroll. And then the other passage that he points out is on page 124, and here's what it says. While these blessings and curses, parentheses, better, a list of blessed and cursed men, clearly correspond to the 10 proclamations. It's worth noting that the behaviors listed in the former are not always precise fulfillments or transgressions of the laws included in the latter. For example, and then he gives some Hebrew based on the text of the Moses scroll, one can refrain from hating his fellow without loving him. Likewise, the blessed man corresponding to E44 and also G4, 5 through 7, which is not necessarily an instance of either false testimony or judgment. Now, what I found really striking is that he compares an interesting connection. This will be the last thing I touch on. And let me see. Here it is. This is the blessed man of G4, 6 through 7. Blessed is the man who does not deceive or lie to his fellow, and all the people shall say, Amen. Not only does this match Hosea's sin of deceit in content, he's quoting Hosea chapter 4, verse 2, it contains the very same verb, kaf, het, shin, deceive. Thus, Hosea's list of offenses reflects the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th items in these Decalogue constellation, and it betrays a closer kinship with the valediction of Moses than with any canonical text.
Yes.
All of that.
Just say that last bit again.
Here we go. It betrays a closer kinship. In other words, Hosea 4:2 looks more like what he would have seen in the valediction of the Moses scroll with the valediction of Moses than with any canonical text. So just to summarize all of that I just said, which can get kind of heavy, I was trying to read through it quickly. Hosea 4:2 mentions swearing, deceiving, murder, stealing, and adultery break out. Bloodshed follows bloodshed. Then he points out that list of infractions doesn't follow the 10 words in the canonical text, but again, it matches the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th of our text. What is the chance that there's that much congruence between an ancient text and what Hosea saw?
That is great. I'm so glad that you pointed that out because I didn't go into that. What I became infatuated with was verse 24, which is chapter 6, verse 5 in an English Bible. And what that says, Ross, and here's another connection to the Decalogue. If anything else about which he swore falsely, he shall repay the principal amount and add a fifth to it. He shall pay the owner, and so on and so forth. But I want to focus in on swore falsely.
Okay.
And just to illustrate this connection, I think we go to Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 9, if that's all right. Let's just go over there. I'll race you. Okay. Verse which I know you are well acquainted, and it says, Jeremiah says, will you steal and murder and commit adultery and swear falsely and sacrifice to Baal and follow other gods whom you have not experienced? But again, will you steal and murder and commit adultery and swear falsely, Ross? Here, as with Leviticus chapter 6, verse 5 in a Christian Bible, we see that phrase verbatim, and it's taken from the Moses Scroll. What is the significance of Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 9?
Jeremiah chapter 7 is the temple sermon. Is that what you're getting at? I mean, Jeremiah is standing in the temple in Jeremiah chapter 7. He's being very critical of the people, and it seems to follow because Jeremiah 7 and Jeremiah 26 seem to follow the discovery of the scroll. So he's standing up preaching basically from the scroll. What do you see there?
He is doing that, and the reason why we can say that is because he uses that phrase to swear falsely, because we don't have that phrase when it comes to the corresponding texts in of the Decalogue in Deuteronomy chapter 5 and Exodus chapter 20.
That's right.
What we have there is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. You shall not take
it means lift the name, which sounds a little bit like it might mean swear, but yeah, you're right. It doesn't have
a different word.
Phrase. Yeah,
it's a different word. So it is interesting that once again we have vocabulary that seems to be taken, that all of this is relating to the Decalogue, and it seems to be taken from the Moses Scroll rather than the canonical text. The other thing that strikes me about this, as we're talking about it, Ross, is that it seems to show, even though we've said, we've pointed out at the beginning of the show, the priestly text is primarily concerned with the tabernacle, the altar, the priesthood, the sacrifices, all that sort of stuff. It doesn't care so much about the covenant of the Ten Commandments. It doesn't really even talk about it, or the golden calf, or the fact that God spoke to the people the day of the assembly. All this sort of stuff seems to be missing. It's certainly not the focus, and yet we have texts like this that make it clear that they had it. They had it, but they're aware of it.
Yeah, and to your point, it's almost like some of these texts seem to suggest Jeremiah 7, Hosea chapter 4. These are what Edan Dershowitz calls intertext associated with the Decalogue. And it seems that these prophets, the most ancient prophets, in fact, seem to know of a text that predates, more closely aligns with the Moses Scroll than the canonical. I mean, we've talked about this. We've done a whole series on the 10 words, and we pointed out all the different versions. It is striking that Hosea and Micah and some of these other prophets seem to be pointing at something that we no longer have until or unless we bring in a text like the Moses Scroll.
Amen. All right. Is there anything else that you want to highlight, Ross, before we sign off?
Man, I'm going to tell you what. This is a fantastic Torah portion. I've learned a lot, and I think that about puts a bow on Vayikra. The only thing that I would add is. And I have to add this because next week we get into Tzav. Now, I have to say this because normally the Haftarah for Tzav is Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 21 through 25, which says that God never commanded sacrifice when the children of Israel left Egypt, right? That is the verse that they assign to Sav, which deals with sacrifices and offerings. So the question, but we're not going to do it next. The Haftarah is different for next week because we're approaching Pesach. And so it's changed. But I had to throw that in there. That's all that I'm going to share it this week, I think.
Good stuff. We'll see if there are any Torah portions in next week's, any Torah pills in next week's Torah portion. But we'll be back this time next week. And until then, have a great one. Ezra, take us on out.
And that's a wrap on Vayikra, where sacrifice, structure, and sacred space all take center stage. If you've ever wondered how ancient Israel kept the divine presence in their midst, this parasha laid the groundwork. Don't miss next week's Torah Pearls as we dive into Tzav, where the altar fire stays lit, the priesthood takes action, and ritual becomes daily rhythm. Before you go, make sure to like, share, and tell your fellow Torah students. And grab the Leviticus Torah tablet from Horeb Press. It's a scripture journal designed for deep, reflective study. With a classic ASV text, bolded divine names, space for notes, and integrated scholarly insights, it's the perfect companion for your journey through the Pentateuch. Catch you in Tzav. Shalom.